Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. I'm Kate Armitage. I'm your host and ambassador for the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Sarah Gray, who is Head of ZEV Strategy and Development at Dawsongroup. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Hi, Kate. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you too. It's been quite a busy year for you, I know. You're in a new role. Could you tell me a little bit more about the Dawsongroup?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I joined Dawsongroup Vans back in November as head of zero emission vehicle strategy and development, as you mentioned. But Dawsongroup have got quite a few different strands to their business. So I work for the vans business. We've also got a truck and trailer department, bus and coach business, EMC, which is sweepers. We've got material handling. We've got Dawsongroup Finance, and then we've got temperature controlled systems, which is like the pop-up tents type thing for you can refrigerate and keep things at the right temperature. And then finally, we've got Energy Solutions, who I'm working really closely with to kind of look at not just supplying the vans, but also some solutions in terms of how they can charge those vans.
Sounds like a great fit, Sarah, and congratulations on the new job. It sounds very exciting. So we'll talk about vans in more detail later, but I thought we'd kick off the conversation with the ZEV mandate and the 2035 ban on ICE vehicles. So was 2030, moved out to 2035, and looks like it's going to come back into play for 2030 under the new Labour government. What kind of disruption is this causing to business plans? What are the implications of all of this change?
I mean, to be honest, it's confusing, isn't it? It's confusing for us to keep ahead of, even though we're kind of in it every day, let alone end users who are trying to make heads and tails of what they should be taking. But I think for most organisations where they've got company car fleets, I don't think there's going to be much impact. You know, the benefit in kind that attracts employees to company cars, electric company cars, is still there. That's relevant, and I think that's worked really well and been quite successful. So for those that are deploying cars, it's easy, and I think that will be fine. Vans is still unclear, so we're not quite certain yet if it's going to be 2030 or 2035. And in all honesty, I don't think we can bring it forward too much. I would love to, and I think it's the right thing to do, but actually there's so much choice still for diesel vehicles, and there's still some elements of gaps for EVs when we talk about things like payload or power takeoff or towing capability. There's still some gaps. So I think in line with the ZEV mandate taking us to 2035, I think for vans, that's probably where it's going to remain. And I don't think we'll get to quite zero emissions until 2035, unless something big changes. I think manufacturers, they've geared up to produce more zero emission vehicles. But the vans, I do think we're going to be waiting until 2035.
But even 2035 is going to be a challenge, isn't it? It's only 11 years off. So we're talking about from a relatively low starting point where we are today. I think the ZEV mandate target for this year for vans is 9 or 10%?
10% this year.
Right. Okay. And that's not looking like it's going to be achieved.
No, we're probably on target for just under 5% of new registrations at the moment. Yeah. So we're way below that target. Next year that goes up to 16%. So there's going to be more to do.
Massive increase. Yeah,
it is a massive increase, and that's why I think it'd be great to bring it forward. But realistically, I just can't see it unless we start making some real improvements in the electric vans and remove some of the choice for ICE. Because if you can still buy exactly what you want in an internal combustion engine, sometimes cheaper than electric, then there's no real incentive at the moment for people to make that transition. Well, actually, having said that, recently one of our customers, who've probably got about 20 vans on hire through us, I'd spoken to them before about taking electric vans, and they sort of wasn't really committed. But recently one of the tenders specified that they must take electric if they wanted to be included in a particular tender. So they've recently taken 4 electric vans from us. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it, kind of do it or else, but that has an impact. And actually, I think we're going to see more of that.
We're definitely going to see more of that, Sarah. And actually, I think that kind of leads on to my next question, which is around, despite the fact that EVs have been around for, coming up for 15 years now, there are companies who aren't adopting battery electric vehicles, potentially unless they're forced to through a tender process or whatever. So for those customers, so for your customer that's just taken the force, what advice do you give them to get started, and what are the main points that they've had to consider?
I think for quite a few, we do have a lot of SMEs, and quite a lot of those organisations, it is natural for them to say it doesn't work for us. But actually, what I would encourage them to do is have a look at things like use the data that's available for them. So have a look at where your vehicles are travelling. Are your vans stopping during the day? Whereabouts are they stopping? Is there an opportunity for a charge? And actually, what are you carrying? Because quite often we see vans that are not necessarily overloaded, but actually they might be carrying more equipment that's required. So actually, if we can just try and have a look at that payload and see if everything you're carrying is required, then we might find that actually we don't need as much payload as we think we do. I'd also say have a look at where those vehicles are stationary as well, because if they're going back to someone's depot workplace and if there's charging available there, that's really good. Overnight charging, you go out full charge the next day. If they're going back to people's home addresses, is there an opportunity to install home charging where they can be charged at home? Again, going out on a full charge potentially. Or if they are roadside, we need to look at solutions for public charging. And if things like the advisory electric rate is just not going to work for a van charging publicly, so what are those solutions? And we can help them with things like that. So there's probably a number of things that they sort of shy away from. But actually, once you get into conversation and say, well, let's look at the data, let's look at your drivers and where they could charge, and let's look at the solutions that you might require, it actually breaks down quite a few of those barriers, and it makes it much easier to kind of deploy an electric van.
Yeah, great. And I think your point at the very beginning is we're not asking you to take your whole fleet electric. In the same way that we now say that battery electric passenger cars are the low-hanging fruit, relatively easy to do, we're now moving on to a position where actually there is low-hanging fruit within van fleets as well, if you approach it in the right way.
There definitely is. Yeah, I think, if you've got 5 to 10 vans or 10 to 20 vans, there's almost certainly going to be a case within there that, is fit for purpose for electric. So, drives the right amount of miles, can charge well, and that employee just needs a little bit more encouragement or a little bit of assistance, I'd say, just to make sure that they understand the technology and get the best out of it.
Well, let's hold that thought for a minute. Well, for vans, obviously, is your area. We know that there are quite a few challenges with the electrification of vans. Quite a few of them you've already called out. But what solutions would you like to see? How are we going to get over these barriers?
I think, again, charging is probably one of the biggest things because, if a company doesn't have the vans going back to a depot, and, if we think someone like Royal Mail, it's almost like brilliant use case, isn't it? Low miles, go back to a depot, they've got charging facilities. That's a brilliant use case. If you've got a fleet of, say, 10 vans and they all go back to an employee's home location, charging is actually quite a big barrier because they know that there's a bit of investment. If the employee's got the capability or the ability to add a charge point at home, that's really great. There's a bit of investment, but definitely worthwhile. If they haven't, it's around making the public network work. Or, there are some things where we've seen different fleets linking up with each other and using each other's depot charging, things like that. Again, it doesn't seem like it's a really difficult thing to do, but it's finding the right locations, finding the right partners, making sure there's enough charge points available to charge those vans, and working together on kind of those types of solutions. But, there are a few people in the market or players in the market now that offer public charging cards where you can use different networks, loads of different networks, All-Star being one of them, for example. That means that access to public charging is better for individuals. You haven't got to worry about those payment solutions. So I think charging is probably the biggest one that certainly our customers are worried about. And then once you can overcome the charging, the range on the vehicle becomes less important because you've got the charge in there, facility. And actually the payload, we just need to have a good look at. There is quite a lot of electric vehicles that are fit for purpose on the market now. So have a good look at what you're carrying, what your payload is, how high, how wide, how long do you need your van? Because there are quite a lot of vehicles now that are coming through that are really fit for purpose. So charging first, get that right, and then making sure the van's fit for purpose, and then you don't need many more solutions than that.
No, I wanted to pick up, Sarah, on the point that you made about some of your customers sharing infrastructure with other businesses. I'm hearing this more and more, and it's such an exciting development. I think we've always known it's going to happen, but it does feel like it is starting now, or the very beginning of it. But I do think it actually is potentially more complicated than it first appears in terms of the commercial arrangement and the back office that goes with it. But I really hope to see more of it.
Yeah, I think it will come. I mean, even when you think, we was looking at this probably 5 to 7 years ago or something at workplace, because we'd started transitioning those company cars to electric, and all of a sudden the 20 charge points in the car park wasn't enough, and you've got 50 people with electric. Yeah. And you just need to be a bit smart. You just need a bit of a solution that says, okay, if you're driving in, you get 3 hours. Lunchtime, you're off, someone else is on. So you need to kind of work on that basis, especially if you're sharing someone else's charge points. There needs to be courtesy. You need to have an understanding of who's charging at what point, and hopefully we can make it work.
Yeah. And where you've got workplace charging, so it's for office employees, that infrastructure is usually unused at night, which is the perfect time for all these vans that have gone home with their employees to kind of jump on the back of that and use it. Yeah, I'd love to see more of that. I know it will happen. We will get there eventually. And the other thing, Sarah, that you mentioned was giving drivers the tools that they need to be able to, or to be confident enough to drive and get behind the wheel. Are there any other things that you would recommend employees could do?
I think, yeah. So for the employer, when they're even considering about deploying vehicles, obviously they've got that bit of background to do to understand where they might work the vehicles, having a look at the vehicle journey. But actually, there's quite a big part to play there in terms of the employee. So have a think about things like surveying them to say, look, who is interested in electric vans? Who wants to try one? If you do try one, would you come on the journey with us? Would you really engage? Would you provide feedback? Let us know if you turn up at a charge point and there's an issue, because this is all really helpful, and it will help shape the policy and the processes going forward. If you've got drivers that want to try, potentially have the option to have a home charger, and they might say, do you know what, I've never driven an automatic before, but I'm really up for it, and I'd really like, well, actually you can do things about that. You can provide things like driver training. So first of all, survey the workforce, understand who's willing to help you, where they can charge, and then have a look at some additional tools, which is the driver training element. I would always say try and add telematics as well, because you can get a really good understanding on how those vehicles are performing. And that's not to tell the driver off to say, you're not achieving as many miles per kilowatt as we would expect you to. But that's to say, actually, do you know what? There's a vehicle over here that's performing really well. Let's find out why. Have a conversation, share that knowledge. So you can use that for a bit more driver training. You can look at things like, when they're charging, what state of the battery is when they're charging, to make sure they're charging at the right times. And all this kind of telematics or insight can really help shape, a successful deployment.
Very really interesting, Sarah. And your point about the telematics, I think, is very good. I think as a seasoned EV driver, my previous vehicle had quite a low range compared to what's available now. And there is definitely a trade-off between dropping your speed to 45 or 50 miles an hour if it means you'll get home and don't have to stop for 20 minutes for a charge.
Yeah.
So you're kind of continually doing those calculations about, actually, if I can nurse this battery and get me home, then that's the most efficient way and the most time effective as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you very much for your insight today. As always, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
And you.
And thank you to Dawsongroup for joining GreenFleet Talks. Hopefully we'll be hearing more about what you're doing at Dawsongroup in the future.
Good. Thanks, Kate. Nice to see you.
Great. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you for watching, and tune in to GF365 again soon.